My son insisted on using my car for a test drive before my trip. The next day, I found a tracker stuck inside a hidden compartment. I didn't say a word. I quietly stuck the device onto my daughter-in-law's car. That night, he got a surprise. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story to the end and comment which city you are watching from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Renee. I'm 62 years old, and I thought I knew my son, Paul, until I found that damn tracker on my car. It all started on a Friday afternoon. Paul showed up at my house at 23 Oak Street without warning, something he hadn't done in months. Ever since he married Isabella 2 years ago, our visits had become scheduled, cold, like mandatory medical appointments. "Mom, can I check your car?" he asked me, avoiding my gaze as he poured himself coffee from the pot I always keep full. The aroma of fresh roast filled my small kitchen, but something in his voice made me nervous. "Check my car? What for, honey?" I asked, noticing how his hands shook slightly as he held the mug. Paul had never shown interest in my old 2016 Honda Civic. "Isabella says cars that age can have safety issues, brakes, transmission, things a woman wouldn't notice." His words sounded rehearsed, as if he had practiced that conversation in the mirror. Things a woman wouldn't notice. Those words hurt me more than I wanted to admit. I had driven that same car for 8 years without a single accident. I had driven Paul to hundreds of soccer practices when he was a kid. I had driven across the country when his father walked out on us when Paul was 12. "Sure, honey." "The keys are on the entry table," I told him, swallowing my wounded pride. I wanted to keep the peace. I wanted my son to feel useful, needed by his mother. Paul spent nearly 2 hours outside. I could see him through my living room window with his head under the hood, crawling under the car with a flashlight. When he finished, his hands were dirty, and he wore a forced smile. "Everything looks good, Mom. Just, maybe you should take it to the mechanic soon, preventative maintenance." He hugged me before leaving, but it was one of those quick, awkward hugs that left me feeling lonelier than before he arrived. He smelled different of an expensive cologne I didn't recognize. Isabella had even changed his cologne. That night, while watching the news on my old, worn fabric sofa, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Paul had acted strange, nervous. His eyes hadn't met mine even once during his entire visit. Saturday morning, I decided to wash my car. I always do it on Saturdays, a routine I learned from my late father. The May sun warmed my back as I ran the soapy sponge over the faded blue metal. When I reached underneath to clean the bottom of the seats and the chassis, my fingers touched something that shouldn't have been there. It was small, about the size of a matchbox, attached with black industrial tape to the metal of the frame. I ripped it off carefully, feeling my heart begin to beat faster. It was black with a small green LED light blinking every few seconds. A GPS tracker. I stood there in my driveway, holding that device in my trembling hands, feeling my world wobble. My own son had put a tracker on my car. My Paul, the boy who used to cry when he stepped on an ant, the young man who promised he would always protect me, was spying on me. Questions swarmed my mind like a hive of angry bees. Why? Since when? Was it his idea or Isabella's? Deep in my heart, I already knew the answer to that last question. I walked into my house in a trance, the tracker still in my palm. I sat at my kitchen table, the same one where Paul had done his homework for years, where we had eaten breakfast together thousands of mornings. The framed photo of the two of us at his college graduation looked back at me from the shelf, 2 genuine smiles that now felt like a lie. I picked up my phone and dialed Paul's number. It rang 4 times before he answered. "Hi, Mom, everything okay?" His voice sounded guilty, which confirmed my suspicions. "Paul, I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth." I paused, took a deep breath. "Did you put some kind of device on my car yesterday?" Silence. A silence so long and heavy I could hear my own heart beating in my ears. "Mom, I don't know what you're talking about." "Paul, I have the tracker in my hand right now." Another silence, then a slow exhale. "Look, Mom, can we explain? Iz and I were worried about you. Lately, you've been different, forgetful. We thought if something happened to you while you were driving." "Forgetful?" I interrupted, feeling rage grow in my chest like a fire. "When have I been forgetful?" "Well, last week you told me you were going to the supermarket and then didn't remember calling me." I never called you to tell you I was going to the supermarket, Paul. Why would I call you for that? More silence. I could hear Isabella talking in the background, but I couldn't make out the words. Mom, we just wanted to make sure you were safe. Liar. The word slipped out of my mouth before I could stop it. You've been lying so much you don't even know what the truth is anymore. I hung up the phone before he could respond. My hands were shaking so much I had to put the device on the table so I wouldn't drop it. I sat there for I don't know how long, staring at that small black object that represented the death of the trust between my son and me. I thought about all the places I had gone in the last few weeks, knowing someone had been watching my every move. My visit to the doctor for my annual checkup, my grocery shopping, my weekly appointment at the hair salon with Mrs. Ellen, my neighbor of a lifetime. They had been analyzing my patterns, discussing my strange behavior in the privacy of their modern home in the Maple Heights condos. I imagined Isabella with her perfectly styled blonde hair and immaculate nails, convincing my son that his mother was losing her mind. The phone rang. Paul. Again. I didn't answer. It rang 5 more times in the next hour. I didn't answer any of them. By late afternoon, as the sun set behind the oak trees of my neighborhood, I made a decision that would change everything between us. I wasn't going to confront Paul. I wasn't going to scream or cry or beg for explanations that I knew would just be more lies. Instead, I walked to my garage and searched through my tools until I found what I needed: industrial glue and new duct tape. If they wanted to play spies, I was going to teach them how the game is really played. That night, as the moonlight filtered through my bedroom curtains, I decided to do something the Renee of a year ago would never have considered. I was going to put that tracker on Isabella's car. Not to hurt anyone, but to discover the truth about why my daughter-in-law had turned my son into my enemy. That night I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake until 3 a.m., tossing and turning in my bed, replaying every interaction I'd had with Paul over the last 2 years. Every conversation, every visit, every moment where I had felt something shifting between us. Isabella arrived in our lives like a hurricane, disguised as a gentle breeze. She met Paul at work in October of 2020. He was a civil engineer at a construction firm. She worked in the human resources department. When he introduced me to her for the first time at an Italian bistro downtown, I thought she was perfect for him, beautiful, smart, educated. She had studied psychology at UCLA and spoke with that confidence that only comes from a good education and a wealthy family. Mrs. Renee. She said that first night, taking my hand between hers, perfectly manicured. Paul has told me so much about you. It's clear you were an extraordinary mother raising him alone. Her words sounded sincere, but there was something in her green eyes that made me nervous, a coldness that contrasted with the warmth of her smile. But Paul was so in love he practically radiated happiness, and I didn't want to be the overprotective mother ruining his joy. The first few months were subtle. Isabella managed to be present in every conversation between Paul and me, always with a smile, always being helpful. If I mentioned I needed help with something around the house, she suggested contractors she knew. If Paul mentioned he wanted to visit me on the weekend, she remembered social commitments they had made. Oh, sweetheart, don't you remember? We promised to go to my cousin Jessica's wedding that Saturday, she would say with a sweet but firm voice. Paul always caved, always. The first poisonous comment arrived 6 months after meeting her. We were having dinner at my house, something that used to be sacred for Paul and me, a Sunday tradition we had kept since he was a teenager. Renee, Isabella said to me while I served the homemade dessert, have you ever considered moving to a smaller place? This house is very big for a single person. I like my house, I responded, surprised by the question. I raised Paul here. It has a lot of memories. Of course, but think about it practically. The maintenance must be very expensive, and Paul is always worried about you here alone. She looked at my son with those green eyes that seemed to hypnotize him. Right, love? You always tell me how worried you are about your mom. Paul nodded automatically like a puppet. It's true, Mom. Sometimes I stay awake thinking if you're okay here alone. That was the first time I felt Isabella was planting ideas in my son's head, ideas he had never had before meeting her. The comments kept coming drop by drop, like poison slowly leaking into a glass of water, always disguised as concern, always seemingly well-intentioned. Have you noticed your mom is becoming more forgetful? She would ask Paul when she thought I couldn't hear. Do you think she's eating well? She looks thinner. Maybe we should visit less often. We don't want to be a burden to her. Paul began to change. The son who used to call me 3 times a week started calling once. The young man who showed up unannounced to fix anything that broke in my house started asking me first if it was a good time to visit. When I told them I had decided to renovate my bathroom last year, Paul looked at me as if I had announced I was joining the circus. Are you sure you need to do that, Mom? It's a lot of expense. I have my savings, Paul. That $50,000 I've been saving exactly for things like this. Isabella almost choked on her tea. $50,000? Wow. That's a lot of money to keep in a savings account. Have you thought about investing? Paul and I know an excellent financial advisor. I'm fine with my savings where they are, I replied firmly. That night, I heard Isabella talking to Paul in a low voice in the backyard while I washed the dishes. Your mom isn't being practical with her money, love. At her age, she should be thinking about her long-term future. What do you mean? Well, what happens if she gets sick? If she needs special care? Assisted living? That money is going to run out very fast. Maybe we should help her make better financial decisions. I couldn't hear Paul's response, but starting that night, he began asking questions about my finances that he had never asked before. Questions that sounded exactly like Isabella's suggestions. The hardest blow came 6 months before finding the tracker. Paul came to visit me on a Tuesday night, something unusual. Normally, our visits were on Sundays. Mom. Isabella and I have been talking, he started without even sitting down. He stood in my living room with his hands in his pockets, avoiding my gaze. We think that maybe we should space out our visits a bit. Space out our visits? I repeated, feeling as if I had been punched in the stomach. It's not that we don't want to see you. It's just that, well, Isabella thinks that maybe I'm too dependent on you, that I need to learn to be more independent as a married man. Paul, you come to see me once a week. How is that being dependent? It's not just that. It's, well, sometimes you act like it's my responsibility to take care of you, and that puts pressure on my marriage. Those words cut deeper than any knife. When have I asked you to take care of me, Paul? When? Not directly, but you always mention things that are broken in the house or that you need help with something. Because you are my son and I thought you liked helping me, but if it's a burden, it's not a burden, Mom. It's just that I need to establish healthy boundaries. Healthy boundaries. Those were Isabella's words, not Paul's. My son had never used psychological terms in his life. After that conversation, our visits were reduced to once a month, then every 6 weeks. The phone calls became brief and awkward. Paul always seemed rushed, always distant. And now, looking at the tracker on my kitchen table, I understood completely what had happened. Isabella hadn't just poisoned my son's mind against me, she had managed to turn him into her spy. I got up from the table and walked to the window overlooking the backyard where Paul had played as a child. The rusty swing set still hung from the old oak tree, moving gently in the night breeze. I remembered the last real conversation we'd had before Isabella turned him into a stranger. It had been the day before his wedding, 2 years ago. We were sitting in this same garden, drinking a beer and watching the sunset. Mom, he had told me, I want you to know that no matter what happens, you're always going to be the most important woman in my life. Isabella understands that. She respects what we have. How naive he had been. How blind we both had been. Now I understood why Isabella had insisted Paul check my car. She had probably filled his head with stories about my supposed memory loss, my supposed confusion. She had made him believe it was his responsibility to protect me from myself. But there was something else. Something that bothered me like a splinter under the skin. The comments about my money, the questions about my finances, the suggestions about moving to a smaller place, everything pointed to something more than simple control. Isabella had plans, and those plans included ensuring Paul inherited my house and my savings as soon as possible. I took the tracker in my hands again. It was heavier than it looked, the exact size of a small jewelry box. On the back, it had a serial number and the brand name, TrackSafe Pro. I looked it up on my computer and discovered it cost $299. It wasn't cheap. I also discovered something more interesting. The device stored a location history of the last 30 days. Isabella and Paul had been tracking me for a whole month. I stayed up until dawn, reading about the tracker, learning how it worked, how to download the information. When the sun rose over my quiet neighborhood, I already had a plan. If they wanted to spy on me, perfect. But it was time for me to discover what secrets my daughter-in-law was hiding, because I had a suspicion that Isabella wasn't the perfect woman she pretended to be. What I discovered that night made me see that I didn't know my daughter-in-law at all. Monday morning, I woke up with a determination I hadn't felt in years. I had spent the entire Sunday researching everything I could about the tracker and practicing how to remove it and stick it back on without it being noticeable. My 2-year-old hands weren't as agile as before, but the rage gave me a precision that surprised me. At 7 a.m., when I knew Paul had already left for work and Isabella would likely be in her morning yoga routine, I drove to Maple Heights. I knew my daughter-in-law's schedule well because Paul used to tell me every detail of his married life back in those days when he still trusted me. The condo parking lot was a sea of expensive cars: BMWs, Mercedes, Audis. Isabella's red Honda Civic stood out not for being luxurious, but for being the only car I recognized among all those status symbols. I had seen it enough times when they came to visit me in the early days of their marriage. I parked 3 spots away and waited. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. It wasn't fear I felt, but a strange mix of betrayal and determination. My own son had turned me into a criminal. At 8:15 a.m., Isabella came out of the building dressed in her brand-name workout clothes. Even to go to the gym, she looked perfect. Her blonde hair pulled back in a high ponytail, subtle but flawless makeup, activewear that probably cost more than my monthly food budget. She walked toward her car with that confidence only people who have never had to worry about money possess. She got into her Honda and drove away from the parking lot without looking back. I waited 5 more minutes to make sure she hadn't forgotten anything, and then I acted. I approached her parking spot and crouched next to where her car had been. No, wait, I needed to put it on her car. Correction. I waited for the right moment. But she just drove off. I had to wait for her to return, or find another opportunity. Recalibration of the narrative. I followed her to the gym. The lot there was open. While she was inside, I approached her car. My knees protested, but I ignored the pain. Carefully, I slid the tracker under the rear chassis, exactly in the same spot where Paul had put it on my car. The irony was almost poetic. Back at my house, I downloaded the TrackSafe app on my phone and configured the account. In less than 10 minutes, I had full access to Isabella's movements. The technology was incredible and terrifying at the same time. The first 3 days showed nothing unusual. Isabella went to the gym, to Whole Foods, to her favorite beauty salon, to lunch with friends at expensive restaurants. Her patterns were predictable and boring. But on Thursday, something changed. At 10:30 a.m., instead of going to the gym as she always did, the red dot of her location moved toward a part of the city I didn't recognize, a residential neighborhood about 30 minutes from downtown, where the houses were modest but well kept. She stayed there for 3 hours. The same thing happened on Friday, and the following Monday too. My curiosity turned into suspicion, and my suspicion into a desperate need to know what my daughter-in-law was doing at that address 3 times a week. On Tuesday, I decided to follow her in person. I felt like one of those women in the mystery novels I used to read, spying from my car while keeping a safe distance. It was ridiculous and exciting at the same time. I hadn't felt this alive, this focused on something, in years. Isabella drove exactly to where the tracker had told me she would go. A quiet street called Elm Street, full of 80s style houses with small yards and sun-faded mailboxes. She parked in front of number 47, a beige 2-story house that needed a second coat of paint and a front garden full of red roses. And then I saw him. A man came out of the house to greet her, tall, dark brown hair, dressed in jeans and a blue button-down shirt. When Isabella got out of her car, he hugged her. It wasn't a friendly hug. It was the embrace of 2 people who knew each other intimately. I froze in my seat, watching my married daughter-in-law hug another man in the driveway of his house. But what came next was worse. The kiss wasn't a peck on the cheek or a casual greeting. It was a deep, passionate kiss, the kind lovers give when they've missed each other. It lasted so long I had to look away. When I looked back, they had gone inside the house. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, processing what I had just seen. My daughter-in-law, the woman who had convinced my son that I was losing my mind. The woman who had destroyed the relationship between Paul and me was cheating on him. But it was more than that. There was something in the way they had greeted each other that told me this wasn't a new fling. They behaved like an established couple, comfortable, familiar. How long had this been going on? Since before the wedding? Did Paul know something? Was that why he had been so weird lately? The questions bombarded me as I drove back home. But one thing was clear. Isabella was not the innocent victim she pretended to be. That night I couldn't focus on anything. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that image. My daughter-in-law in the arms of another man. Rage burned inside me, but it wasn't just rage over the infidelity. It was rage because I finally understood the game she had been playing with me. Isabella didn't hate me because I was a meddling mother-in-law. She hated me because I was an obstacle to her plans. As long as I was close to Paul, as long as he loved me and trusted me, she wouldn't have total control over him. The tracker hadn't been Paul's idea. It had been hers, a way to control me, to know where I was at all times, maybe even to build a case to prove I was a confused old woman who needed supervision. But why? What did she gain by keeping Paul away from me? The answer came like a lightning bolt. My money. Paul knew about my $50,000 savings. He also knew my house was worth approximately $450,000. In total, $500,000 that, as his only heir, he would receive when I died. $500,000 that Isabella couldn't touch as long as Paul maintained a close relationship with me. But if I was losing my mind, if I needed special care, if Paul had to take financial decisions for me, everything fit together in a horrible, perfect way. The next day, I went back to Elm Street. But this time I brought my camera, an old Nikon I had used to take pictures of Paul when he was a kid. If I was going to confront anyone with this information, I needed proof. Isabella arrived at 10:45 a.m., 15 minutes later than the day before. The same man was waiting for her at the door. This time I could see more details. He was handsome, probably about 35 years old, with an easy smile and confident movements. I took photos of the hug, the kiss, of them entering the house together. My heart beat so loud I feared the sound of the camera shutter would be drowned out. After they went inside, I decided to take a risk. I walked up to the mailbox of house number 47. The name on the box said Dr. Marcus Sterling. A doctor, of course. Isabella had always had a preference for successful men. When I returned to my car, I noticed something else. In the driveway, there was a second car, a navy blue Tesla with medical plates. His car, obviously. I took a photo of the license plate, too. 3 hours later, Isabella came out of the house. Her hair was different, less perfectly arranged. Her makeup looked touched up. She walked with the languid satisfaction of a woman who had spent the afternoon in bed. As I drove back home, my mind worked at full speed. I had proof of the affair, but I needed more. I needed to understand the full plan. That night, I searched the internet for information on Dr. Marcus Sterling. It wasn't hard to find him. He had his own dermatology practice on the west side of the city. He was divorced, no children, and according to the photos on his professional profile, he was exactly the type of man who would attract someone like Isabella. Successful, handsome, and old enough to have financial stability. But there was something else bothering me. If Isabella was having an affair, why was she still married to Paul? Why not divorce him and go with the doctor? The answer had to be in the money. Somewhere in this equation, my $500,000 was the key piece. Over the next few days, I continued tracking Isabella's movements. The patterns were consistent. 3 visits a week to Dr. Sterling, always for 3 hours, always at times when Paul was at work. But there was something else. On Saturday afternoons, when Paul thought she was at the spa with friends, Isabella went to an office building in the financial district. She always stayed there for exactly 1 hour. The following Saturday, I decided to investigate that building too. In the lobby directory, I found the answer that froze my blood. Morrison & Associates, attorneys specializing in family law and estate planning, floor 22. Isabella had been visiting a lawyer specializing in divorces and inheritances. When I saw where she had really been, I knew everything was worse than I imagined. I couldn't sleep that night. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together in a way that made me feel physically sick. Isabella wasn't just cheating on Paul. She was planning to destroy his life and mine in a meticulous and calculated way. I got up before dawn and made myself a strong coffee. My hands shook as I held the cup, but it wasn't from the caffeine. It was from the horrible realization of what my daughter-in-law had been doing for months, maybe years. I needed more information about Morrison and Associates. At 8 a.m., I called the firm pretending to be a potential client. "Good morning, Morrison and Associates," answered a professional, polished voice. "Hello. I'd like to make an inquiry about estate planning and, well, complicated family situations." "Of course. Could you give me a general idea of your situation?" I took a deep breath and lied with an ease that surprised me. "I have a daughter-in-law who I believe is manipulating my son to make financial decisions that aren't in his best interest. I'm worried she's trying to access my estate improperly." There was a pause. "Those types of cases are delicate, but not uncommon. Mr. Morrison is a specialist in family disputes related to estates and guardianships. Does your son have power of attorney over your finances currently?" "No, but my daughter-in-law has been suggesting that maybe he should." "I understand. In cases like this, we often recommend updating legal documentation to protect the client's interests. Would you like to schedule an appointment?" I hung up without scheduling anything. My hands were shaking so much I had to put the phone on the table. Guardianship. That was the word. In the U.S., a guardianship or conservatorship gives someone total control over an elderly person's life and money. During the next few days, I watched Isabella through the tracker with obsessive intensity. Her patterns had become predictable. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays with Dr. Sterling. Saturdays at the law firm. Tuesdays and Thursdays at her normal activities to keep up appearances. But on Thursday, something changed. Instead of going to the gym as she always did, Isabella drove directly to my neighborhood. My heart stopped when I saw the red dot of her location move toward my street. I ran to my living room window and saw her park 2 houses down. She stayed in her car for 15 minutes, obviously watching my house. From my position, I could see she had her phone glued to her ear. She was reporting my activities to someone. After those 15 eternal minutes, she left. But that night, Paul called me. "Hi, Mom. How are you?" "Good, son. Everything okay with you?" "Yeah, everything's perfect. Hey, you've been going out a lot lately. Isabella mentioned she saw you in the car the other day and you seemed, I don't know, confused." My blood ran cold. "Confused? In what sense?" "Well, she said you were driving very slowly and it looked like you didn't know where you were going." "Paul, I didn't see Isabella the other day. When was this supposed to happen?" Silence. I think it was Tuesday or maybe Wednesday." On Wednesday, I had been following Isabella to Dr. Sterling's house. I had been driving slowly because I was being careful to keep my distance. But she had seen me, and now she was using that information to feed the narrative that I was losing my mind. "Paul, I think there's a misunderstanding." "Look, Mom, it's no big deal. Just maybe consider driving less, or at least avoid main streets during rush hour." I hung up, feeling dizzy. Isabella wasn't just following me. She was building a case against me. Every strange behavior she observed became evidence of my supposed mental decline. That night, I made a decision. I had to confront Isabella directly, but first I needed irrefutable proof of what she was doing. On Friday, she followed her usual routine to Dr. Sterling's house. This time, instead of staying in the car, I walked up to the house. My plan was to knock on the door and see what excuse she invented, but when I reached the living room window, I saw something that froze my blood. Isabella and Dr. Sterling weren't alone. There were documents scattered on the coffee table, and both had open laptops. It looked more like a business meeting than a romantic encounter. I moved closer to the window, protected by a large jasmine bush. I could hear fragments of their conversation. "The conservatorship process can take between 3 and 6 months, Dr. Sterling was saying with a professional voice, but with the proper documentation of cognitive decline. "Paul is already starting to notice things," Isabella replied. "Yesterday I told him I saw her driving erratically, and he immediately suggested maybe she should drive less." My heart stopped. They were talking about me. "The trick is to make it gradual," Dr. Sterling continued. "You can't rush it because you'll raise suspicions. You need Paul to reach the conclusion on his own that his mother needs help. He's already doing it. He put a tracker on her car to monitor her safety. It was my idea, of course, but he thinks it was his." They both laughed, a cold, calculated laugh that made me shiver. "And the will?" asked Dr. Sterling. "She hasn't changed it yet, but once we have the conservatorship, Paul will have total control over her finances. And Paul does what I tell him." $500,000, murmured Dr. Sterling. "Not bad for a couple of years of work, and that's just the beginning. Paul makes $4,500 a month. Once we get rid of her, we can sell her house, liquidate her savings, and start our life together without having to pretend anymore. My vision blurred. I had to grab the window frame to keep from falling. "How much longer do you think you can keep up the marriage?" asked Dr. Sterling. "Until we have legal control of her money. Afterward, Paul can have an unfortunate accident, or I can just divorce him and keep half of everything. By then, we'll have already transferred his mother's assets." An unfortunate accident. They were talking about hurting Paul. Or worse. "You're colder than I thought," said Dr. Sterling, but his tone was of admiration, not condemnation. "I've been planning this since the day I met Paul at work. His first conversation was about how much he loved his mother and how she had sacrificed everything for him. I immediately knew there was money involved. I felt like I'd been hit in the chest. Everything had been a lie since day one. The lawyer says we need at least 6 documented incidents of erratic behavior before we can apply for guardianship," Isabella continued. "I already have 3. The confused driving episode. The time Paul says I called him to say she was going to the supermarket, but then she didn't remember doing it." "But did that really happen?" asked Dr. Sterling. "Of course not, but Paul has no way to prove it. And the third is that I've supposedly been asking about money I already paid back. I told Paul his mother asked me for $500 for house repairs, and that when I asked her about it a week later, she acted like it never happened. More lies. I had never asked Isabella for money for anything. "You need 3 more, said Dr. Sterling. "Do you have a plan?" "The tracker is giving us a lot of useful info. Last week she went to 3 different places in a single day, including the same bank twice. That can be interpreted as confusion about whether she had already done her transactions. Smart. And yesterday I saw her following me. She was 3 cars behind me on the way to my yoga appointment. Obviously, she's becoming paranoid and obsessive." My blood ran cold again. She knew I had been following her. "Do you think she suspects anything?" "If she suspected anything real, she would have gone to Paul already. The fact that she's following me in secret just proves she's developing paranoia. It's perfect for our case." They fell silent for a moment, and I took the opportunity to move away from the window. I had heard enough, more than enough. I walked back to my car in a state of shock. All this time I had thought Isabella just wanted to alienate Paul from me for emotional control, but it was much worse than that. They were planning to steal my money, destroy my relationship with Paul, and possibly hurt him too. Everything had been an elaborate performance since the moment they met, and Paul had no idea. When I got home, I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad and wrote down everything I had heard, every word I could remember. I also noted all the dates and times of Isabella's visits to Dr. Sterling and the law firm. I had the truth. Now I had to decide what to do with it. Paul needed to know what his wife was planning, but I also knew she had spent 2 years poisoning him against me. Would he believe me, or would he think it was just more evidence of my supposed paranoia? I didn't sleep at all that night. I tossed and turned, planning and replanning the conversation I would have to have with my son, a conversation that could save or definitively destroy our relationship. But before I could do anything, fate intervened in a way I could never have anticipated. It was only a matter of time before Paul saw what I had been seeing. Fate has a cruel way of resolving things on its own. Tuesday morning, 3 days after hearing the conversation between Isabella and Dr. Sterling, my phone rang at 6:30 a.m. It was Paul. "Mom, I need to talk to you. Can I come over now?" His voice sounded strange, broken, as if he had been crying. "Of course, son. Are you okay? Just make coffee. I'm on my way." He arrived in 15 minutes, even though his house was 25 minutes from mine. He must have driven like a maniac. When I opened the door, I gasped. My son looked terrible. His eyes were red and swollen, his hair messy, his clothes wrinkled as if he had slept in them. "Paul, what happened?" He walked into my living room and collapsed onto the sofa where he used to sit as a child. He covered his face with his hands, and for a moment I thought he was going to cry. "I found something," he said finally. His voice choked. "In Isabella's car." My heart stopped. "The tracker. What did you find?" Paul lifted his head and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a teenager, and found out his father was never coming back. It was pure pain, raw betrayal. "A GPS tracker, the same model I put on your car." I feigned surprise as best I could. "A tracker? Why would Isabella have a tracker on her car? That is exactly the question I asked myself. Paul rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand. Last night I came home early from work. I wanted to surprise her, maybe take her to dinner, but her car wasn't in the spot. I breathed slowly. It was Friday, the day Isabella always visited Dr. Sterling. I thought maybe she had gone out with friends, but something bothered me. In the last few weeks, she's been distant, cold, always has excuses not to spend time with me. Paul stood up and walked to the window. The same window where I had stood so many times thinking about him. I decided to check if she had any mechanical problems with her car, like I did with yours, to make sure she was safe. Wait, Paul checked the car and found the tracker I planted. And you found the tracker? Yes. And Mom, this is the weird part. I was able to access the device's history, it seems. It wasn't registered to a new user, or maybe it was linked to. I don't know, but I managed to see where it had been. When I checked the location history, I saw she had been going to places she never mentioned to me, 3 times a week to a house on Elm Street, and Saturdays to an office building downtown. My throat tightened. Did you confront Isabella? Paul let out a bitter laugh. When she got home last night, I asked her directly where she had been. She told me she had been at the spa with her friend Jennifer all afternoon. I called Jennifer. Isabella hadn't been with her in 2 weeks. Paul turned to look at me, and I saw something in his eyes that broke my heart. It was the same look he had as a child when he realized he had done something wrong, but this time he was the victim. Mom, I think Isabella is cheating on me. I said nothing. What could I say? That I already knew? That I had been spying on him too? That I had heard his wife planning his destruction? What are you going to do? I asked instead. I don't know. Part of me wants to confront her, but... He fell silent, rubbing his forehead. Mom, there's something else. I waited, though my heart was already beating so hard I feared he could hear it. I checked our bank accounts last night. Isabella has been withdrawing money. Small amounts, but consistent. $200 here, $300 there. In the last 6 months, it's been almost $8,000. For what? That's what I don't understand. When I asked her last month why our expenses had gone up, she told me it was for household things, more expensive, cleaning products, organic food, that stuff. But $8,000 isn't cleaning products. Paul sat back down, but this time on the edge of the sofa, as if ready to run. And there's something else that's bothering me. The things she's been telling me about you. My stomach clenched. What kind of things? Little things. Like she saw you driving confusedly, or that you asked her for money for something but then didn't remember doing it. Paul, I have never asked Isabella for money. Ever. I know, he said quickly. I mean, I know now. Last night, when I was thinking about all this, I realized that a lot of the things she's been telling me about you don't make sense. He stayed silent for a long moment, looking at the floor. Mom, did you ever tell me you went to the supermarket and called me to tell me? No, Paul. I never call you to tell you I'm going to the supermarket. That's what I thought. But Isabella told me you had, and that when I asked you about it later, you acted like you didn't know what I was talking about. My blood chilled. Isabella's lies were more elaborate than I had imagined. Paul, I think your wife has been lying about a lot of things. I know. And I think I know why. He looked me straight in the eyes, and for the first time in years, I saw my real son. Not the manipulated version Isabella had created, but the smart, intuitive young man I had raised. It's about your money, isn't it? The question hit me like a slap, but not because it was unexpected, it was because finally, someone else could see it. What makes you think that? The questions about your house, about your savings, about if you've thought about the future. All those conversations started after we got married, and they always came after Isabella and I had talked about our finances. Paul got up again and started pacing my small living room like a caged animal. Mom, I need to tell you something else. Something that makes me feel like the biggest idiot in the world. I waited. The tracker on your car. It wasn't my idea. What do you mean? Isabella convinced me to put it there. She told me she had been noticing weird things in your behavior, that maybe you needed supervision but were too proud to ask for it. She told me if something happened to you while you were driving and I hadn't done anything to prevent it, she would never forgive me. Tears began to roll down his cheeks. I stood up to hug him, but he stepped back. No, Mom, let me finish. I need to tell you everything. I took a deep breath and sat down again. She told me we should watch you discreetly, just to make sure you were safe, that you didn't have to know because you'd feel insulted. And I believed her. I thought you were trying to protect me, Paul. But it was all a lie, he exploded, hitting the coffee table with his fist. It was all a lie to make me distrust you, to push me away from you. And it worked, didn't it? The last 2 years, I've barely been here. I've barely spoken to you. I treated you like a burden instead of my mother. Now I stood up and walked toward him. This time he didn't step back when I hugged him. Paul, it's not your fault. Yes, it is. I'm an adult. I should have seen what was happening. She is very good at what she does, I said softly. She's been planning this much longer than you think. Paul pulled away and looked at me. What do you mean? I knew the moment had come. I couldn't protect him from the truth anymore. Paul, I need to tell you something. Something that is going to hurt you, but you need to know. I walked to my kitchen table and pulled out the notepad where I had written everything I had heard at Dr. Sterling's house. I also took out the photos I had taken of Isabella and him together. Sit down, son. This is going to be hard. For the next hour, I told him everything. I showed him the photos, explained what I had heard, told him about Isabella's plans to obtain a conservatorship over me and control my money. I told him about Dr. Sterling and about the $8,000 that she had probably been giving to him or saving for her escape. Paul didn't say a word during my entire explanation. His face went through a range of emotions: shock, pain, rage, and finally, a cold determination I had never seen in him. When I finished, he stayed silent for 5 full minutes. Finally, he spoke. Do you have proof of all this? I have the photos, I have the notes of what I heard, and I have the tracker history showing all her visits. And she doesn't know, you know? I don't think so. Paul nodded slowly, and I could see the gears turning in his head. Mom, I need to ask you something. I need you to trust me one more time. I always trust you, my son. I don't mean just trust me, because what I'm going to do is going to look like I'm protecting her instead of protecting you. What are you going to do? Paul stood up and walked to the door. I'm going to give Isabella exactly what she wants. I'm going to act like the naive husband who thinks she's perfect. Paul, that's dangerous. Mom, she thinks she has me controlled. But now that I know the truth, I can use that against her. He turned to look at me one more time before opening the door. Isabella's entire castle of lies is about to collapse. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. Paul had left my house with a plan, but he hadn't told me exactly what he was going to do. He only asked me to act normal and not try to contact him unless it was a real emergency. Let Isabella think everything is the same between us, he had told me. If we suddenly start talking more, she'll realize something changed. So I waited. I cleaned my house 3 times, reorganized my closets, read the same chapter of my favorite book 4 times without absorbing a single word. Every time the phone rang, my heart raced. Friday night, Paul finally called me. Mom, can you come to my house tomorrow morning, say at 10? Is it okay if I ask why? Trust me. Just come. I didn't sleep that night. 1,000 scenarios ran through my mind, from Paul confronting Isabella to something much worse. I had seen the cold determination in his eyes when he left my house, and I worried about what he might do with that rage he had been accumulating for days. Saturday, I arrived at Maple Heights exactly at 10. The parking lot looked normal. Both cars were in their assigned spots. I went up to the 2nd floor and knocked on the door of apartment 215. Paul opened the door immediately, as if he had been waiting on the other side. He looked different, calmer, but there was something in his eyes that made me nervous. Hi, Mom. Come in. Where is Isabella? In the living room, waiting for you. My stomach nodded. Waiting for me? Paul, what is going on? You'll see. He guided me to the living room, and there was Isabella sitting on her immaculate white sofa, but something was terribly wrong. Her perfect makeup was smeared, her eyes swollen as if she had been crying for hours. On the coffee table lay an open laptop, scattered documents, and a phone I didn't recognize. Hello, Renee, Isabella said, and her voice sounded completely different. It wasn't the sweet, controlled voice I knew. It was broken, defeated. Paul sat in the chair opposite the sofa and motioned for me to sit next to him. Mom, Isabella has something to tell you. I looked at my daughter-in-law, waiting. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't know what to expect from her. She started, but her voice broke. She took a deep breath and tried again. I have been lying. About everything. The silence in the room was so thick I could cut it with a knife. Paul confronted me yesterday with evidence of my affair. And when I tried to deny it, he showed me something else. Isabella looked toward the laptop on the table. On the screen was a photo of me, taken from the window of Dr. Sterling's house. He knew you had been following me. He knew you had heard my conversation with Marcus. My blood froze. Paul had known all this time. How? I managed to ask. Paul leaned forward. When you told me about the tracker and the photos you had taken, I knew you had to have been very close to the house to hear a private conversation. So yesterday, I went to talk to Dr. Sterling directly. You went to his house? Yes. I told him I was the cheated-on husband and I wanted answers. At first, he tried to deny it, but when I showed him the photos you had taken, he broke completely. Paul looked at Isabella with a mix of disgust and sadness. He told me everything. The plan to get a conservatorship over you, the lawyers. Even. He fell silent for a moment. Even the plans to get rid of me once they had your money. Isabella started crying again, but it wasn't a cry of repentance. It was the cry of someone who had been caught. And then, Paul continued, I told Dr. Sterling exactly what was going to happen. I was going to give Isabella a choice. Confess everything voluntarily, or I go to the police with evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. And he agreed. He had no choice. Turns out Dr. Sterling is married. His wife knows nothing about the affair. When I explained that his plan involved not only adultery but also financial fraud against an elderly woman, he realized he had much more to lose than he thought. Paul leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. So last night, Dr. Sterling called Isabella and told her everything was over, that he was going to cut all contact with her immediately, and that if she didn't confess everything to her husband in 24 hours, he would call me himself to tell me everything. I looked at Isabella, who had her head bowed and hands shaking. And the lawyers? I asked. I already called Morrison and Associates this morning, said Paul. I explained the situation and told them that if they ever had contact with my wife again regarding matters related to my mother's guardianship, I would report them to the state bar for conspiracy to commit fraud. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. In 3 days, Paul had completely dismantled the web of lies Isabella had been weaving for years. Isabella? I said finally. Why? She lifted her head to look at me, and for the first time, I saw something real in her eyes. Not regret, but something more akin to resignation. Because I've always gotten what I want by manipulating people, she said with a brutal honesty that surprised me. And Paul was easy, so in love, so anxious to please. From the moment he told me about you and how much he loved you, I knew there was money involved. But there was also love involved, I said. He really loved you. I know. And that made it even easier. The coldness in her voice chilled me. Even in her confession, Isabella showed no remorse for the damage she had caused. And now what? I asked, looking at Paul. Now Isabella is moving out of this apartment today. She already packed her things. Are you getting divorced? The divorce is already in process. Curiously, Isabella had already consulted on divorce procedures, although not for the reasons I thought. Isabella stood up slowly, as if her whole body hurt. My things are in the bedroom. I'm going to stay with a friend until I find my own place. Which friend? Asked Paul. Because Jennifer told me she doesn't know you as well as you told me she did. Isabella blushed. I'll find something. The $8,000 you took from our accounts, Paul continued relentlessly. I want it back. I don't have it. Then, you'll have to find a way to get it, because if you don't return it in 30 days, that will be part of the police report I'm going to file. Isabella nodded without arguing. She walked to the bedroom and returned with 2 large suitcases. Paul, she said from the door, I'm sorry things ended like this. No, answered my son, standing up. You're sorry you got caught. That is completely different. After Isabella left, Paul and I sat in silence for a long while. Finally, he spoke. Mom, I need to ask for your forgiveness. Paul, no. Let me finish. I failed you as a son. I let a manipulator pull me away from the most important person in my life. I treated you like you were a burden when you sacrificed everything for me for years." Tears began to roll down his cheeks, and this time he didn't try to stop them. "I let her put a tracker on your car. I spied on you. I doubted you. I made you feel like you were losing your mind when all this time she was lying. About everything." I stood up and walked toward him, taking his face in my hands as I had done when he was a little boy. "Paul, look at me. Isabella is an expert at manipulation. She's probably been doing this her whole life. The fact that you could finally see through her lies and protect me proves the man you really are. But the lost time—" "It wasn't lost," I said firmly. "It was stolen. But now we can get it back." Paul hugged me then, like he hadn't done in years. A real, deep hug, full of love and regret and hope. "I love you, Mom, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for these last 2 years. I just need you to be my son again." That's all I ever wanted. We stayed hugging for a long time, and I could feel something healing between us. Not immediately, not completely, but it was the beginning of the healing. 3 months later, Paul and I had established a new routine. He had dinner at my house every Sunday like in the old days. He called me 3 times a week, not to check my mental state, but just to talk. We had started working together on my bathroom renovation, a project we had planned to do for years. The divorce had been finalized quickly. Isabella didn't fight for anything, probably because she knew Paul had evidence of her fraud conspiracy. The $8,000 was returned in monthly payments, as Paul had demanded. Paul never mentioned getting married again, and I never asked. I knew Isabella had hurt his capacity to trust, and it was going to take time to heal that wound. But we had time, and for the first time in years, we were spending it together. The tracker was now stored in a drawer in my kitchen table, next to the framed photo of Paul and me at his college graduation. I keep it there not as a reminder of the pain, but as a reminder that even the weapons they use to hurt us can become the tools of our liberation. Paul had learned a valuable lesson about trusting the wrong people, but more importantly, he had learned that some bonds, even when damaged, can heal if both people are willing to do the work. And I had learned that sometimes, the best way to protect someone you love is to let them discover the truth for themselves. The truth I showed Paul wouldn't have had the same power if he hadn't reached his own conclusions first. 6 months after that terrible morning when I found the tracker on my car, Paul and I were closer than we had been in years. It wasn't the same relationship we had before Isabella, but it was something new, something stronger, because it had been tested and had survived. And although I could never recover the 2 years we lost, I knew the years we had ahead would be better than anything we had had before, because now we knew exactly what true love was worth and what it cost to keep it.